I went into the woods that afternoon with one simple plan. I wanted to hike an old logging trail I had seen on a map and check if it was still walkable. I told myself it would be an easy few hours. Just walking, maybe taking a few photos of the creek nearby, then heading back before dark. The air was cool and dry when I started, the kind of weather that made the forest feel clean and alive. I remember breathing in the smell of pine and soil as I stepped from the gravel road onto the narrow path covered in dead leaves. Everything felt normal at first, almost peaceful. The trail was rough but easy enough to follow. Fallen branches, broken tree stumps, and sections of soft mud showed that no one had been there in a long time. I liked that. I always preferred being alone in nature. It gave me space to think. I walked slowly, noticing footprints of deer and the tiny claw marks of raccoons near the edges of the path. Birds hopped on branches, and I could hear water rushing faintly from somewhere deeper in the trees. I kept going, feeling completely at ease. But around an hour in, the forest changed. I didn't notice it at first. It started with the wind dying down. Then the birdsong disappeared. Even the distant rush of the creek seemed quieter. The air felt heavier and colder, and the light coming through the trees looked duller, like the sun had slid behind a cloud. The silence was so sudden and so complete that I instantly felt it in my chest. I kept walking, but the silence pressed against me, as if something in the woods had shifted its attention toward me. The farther I went, the darker the trail became. Thick branches locked together overhead, blocking most of the light. The ground was soft with layers of dead leaves and old pine needles, and every step made a deep, muffled crunch. That sound seemed wrong somehow, too loud in the quiet air. I kept telling myself I was imagining things. I had hiked alone many times. Woods go quiet. Animals hide. It was normal, but the feeling of being watched slowly crept up the back of my neck. I brushed it off until I heard the first sound that didn't belong to me. A faint crack somewhere behind me, not loud but sharp, like a stick breaking under weight. I stopped walking and listened. My breathing felt too loud, like it echoed. There was nothing else. No movement, no wind, just my heartbeat thudding in my ears. I walked faster after that. The sound had been real. That much I knew. Maybe a deer, maybe some animal moving around. But the forest stayed quiet, too quiet for anything big to be moving normally. I tried to focus on the trail, but every few minutes I heard something. A faint rustle, a branch creaking, footsteps or what felt like footsteps. Moving when I moved, stopping when I stopped. I told myself it was paranoia, but deep down I knew it wasn't. The trail eventually dipped down toward the creek, the sound of water finally growing louder. I felt a small wave of relief. Running water always made me feel safer, more grounded. I crouched down and splashed some cold water on my face. When I looked at my reflection in the surface, I noticed my shoulders were tight, and my eyes looked unsettled, like I was on alert without even meaning to be. That's when another sound hit me, a slow crunch in the leaves behind me. Not sudden, not accidental, slow and steady. I froze, my hands still wet, my breath caught halfway in my throat. For a moment I thought about turning around, but something deep inside me told me not to. Instead, I slowly stood and started walking up the small slope away from the creek. The sound followed, still slow, still steady. I didn't run, but I moved quickly. The forest grew darker the deeper I went, and the air felt colder. My flashlight was in my bag, but I didn't want to stop long enough to grab it. I just wanted out. The feeling of eyes fixed on my back got stronger. Every few steps, I could hear something moving behind me, always keeping the same distance. Never getting closer, never falling behind, just matching me. I reached an old section of the logging road, barely a path anymore. It was covered in overgrown brush and broken branches, but it led uphill toward where I had parked my truck. I forced my legs to keep moving even though they were burning with every step. The forest on both sides of me was so dense that the slightest shifting shadow made my heart race. The noises behind me grew clearer, more deliberate, leaves crunching, branches bending. A heavy step, then a pause. Another step, another pause. No animal I knew moved like that. It wasn't a deer or a bear. felt like a person keeping just enough distance to stay hidden. My breathing got harder. My hands were shaking. Sweat ran down my spine even though the air was cold. I kept pushing through the thorns and low branches, scraping my arms and legs without caring. The fear was stronger than the pain. Eventually, I reached a narrow stretch of the trail I remembered from earlier. I knew I was getting closer to the road, but the woods felt tighter here, like the trees were leaning in closer. The footsteps behind me were louder now, no longer pretending to be distant. They were closer than they had been at any point before. I still didn't turn around, but the sound of weight shifting on leaves was clear enough that I knew whatever was behind me was maybe 20 or 30 feet away. The urge to run finally hit me, so strong it felt like an instinct taking over. I sprinted up the trail, branches whipping my face, ground uneven under my feet. I nearly fell several times, but I didn't stop. My lungs burned, the cold air stabbing at my throat, but I didn't stop. The footsteps behind me burst into motion as well. They were fast, too fast. They crashed through the leaves and branches with a speed that made the panic explode inside my chest. I reached the top of the hill where the trees thinned. Moonlight broke through the open space, giving me a faint outline of the gravel road ahead. My truck was parked at the far end, barely visible between the trees. The moment I saw it, something inside me snapped loose. Every ounce of energy I had left went into that final sprint. I didn't look back. The footsteps behind me sounded so close that, for a moment, I thought I could feel breath on the back of my neck. I burst out of the trees and stumbled onto the gravel. The sudden brightness of the open sky felt unreal. My legs were shaking so hard I almost fell, but I forced myself up, pushed forward, and reached my truck. My keys were tangled in my pocket, and my hands were shaking so badly that I fumbled them twice before finally unlocking the door. I threw myself inside, slammed it shut, and locked every door. I sat there, chest heaving, hands trembling. The forest in front of me was silent again. No footsteps, no movement, nothing. The woods looked calm, almost peaceful under the moonlight. But the silence felt wrong again, just like before. Wrong in a way that made me stay frozen in my seat for nearly 20 minutes before I dared start the engine. When I finally did drive away, I couldn't stop checking the mirror. Every shadow on the road looked like a figure. Every tree trunk seemed to shift when I blinked. I didn't feel safe until I was miles away, passing under streetlights and seeing houses again. Later that night, when I was home, I finally looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. My arms were scratched and bleeding in places. My shirt was torn at the sleeve. Dirt covered my knees. I looked like someone who had been running for their life. And maybe I had. I thought about what it could have been. A person living deep in the woods. Someone watching hikers. Someone who knew how to move quietly and stay just out of sight. Something real. Something dangerous. Something patient enough to follow me without making a sound until it wanted to. I never went back to that area again. I still hike, but only in places where I know there are other people around. And even then, I always look behind me more than I used to, because I learned something that day, something simple and true. The woods don't need monsters or ghosts to be terrifying. All it takes is someone else out there with you, someone who knows the trees better than you do, someone who doesn't want to be seen. And if they choose to follow you, the forest will hide them perfectly. I had always enjoyed the woods after work. It was a habit I picked up when I was younger, the kind of thing that let me leave the city behind, even if just for an hour or two. On this particular day, I decided to go out to check the trail cameras I had set up around a section of forest about 20 miles from town. I packed lightly, just my backpack, a flashlight, a knife, a small first aid kit, and enough water for the short trip I expected. I told myself I'd be back before dark, but that was a mistake. One of the first mistakes of the night. The drive out was easy. The roads narrowed as I left the highway behind, eventually turning into gravel paths that bounced the car with every dip. The forest outside the window was thick, a tangle of pine and oak that stretched far beyond what the eye could see. I parked at the edge of a small clearing where the first camera was attached to a tree. It was easy work to swap the SD card and check the footage. Nothing unusual: deer, raccoons, the occasional coyote. I packed everything back into my bag and moved on to the next camera. By the time I reached the second camera, the sun was low. The forest looked different in the fading light, sharper somehow, shadows stretching long between the trees. There was a stillness, a heavy silence that made the air feel thicker than it should. I shook it off, telling myself I was just tired, and focused on the task at hand. The camera was mounted near a small creek, the water whispering quietly over rocks. The footage showed a deer grazing by the bank during the day. Nothing alarming, though my unease grew slightly as the shadows grew longer. I decided to take a shortcut back to the truck, a path I hadn't walked in months. It cut through a denser part of the forest, the kind of place where the trees grow close together and the underbrush makes every step slow and deliberate. First, it was fine. My boots crunched over fallen leaves, and the scent of wet soil mixed with pine hung in the air. But after a while, the quiet started to feel oppressive. Birds weren't calling. Squirrels weren't rustling through the brush. Even the creek sounded muffled, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. That's when I noticed something strange. Every time I glanced back over my shoulder, one of the trees seemed slightly off. The shape, the shadow it cast, it didn't match the others. I stopped and stared, my chest tightening. Maybe it was just a trick of the fading light, I thought. But as I moved forward, every few steps a tree appeared darker, wider, somehow out of place. I tried to keep calm, telling myself my mind was playing tricks, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. My steps became faster, heavier. The forest floor grew uneven. Roots twisted underfoot, hidden by leaves, and I stumbled a few times, scraping my knees and hands. My flashlight was useless in the distance. It barely pierced the growing darkness. I reached a small bend in the trail where the trees opened slightly into a clearing. That's when I heard it. A snapping sound, like a branch breaking behind me. I froze. My heart started pounding, loud enough I could hear it in my ears. I waited, holding my breath, straining to hear. Silence, then another snap, closer this time. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to know if something was there. I started moving faster, almost running, but careful not to trip over the roots. My eyes darted from shadow to shadow, trying to make sense of shapes in the darkness. That's when I saw it. A faint, dark movement at the edge of my peripheral vision. I couldn't see clearly, but it was there, moving between the trees. Not running, just following. My stomach turned over, a mix of fear and adrenaline. I forced myself to breathe steadily, trying to think rationally. It had to be an animal, I told myself. Maybe a bear, though the idea of a bear wasn't any more comforting. Then the trail curved sharply downhill. The ground was slippery from the morning's rain, leaves sticking wetly to my boots. I almost lost my footing more than once, and the thought of falling and being trapped in the dark sent a chill down my spine. I kept going, my pace fast but cautious. The sound of movement behind me never stopped. Snap, crunch, snap. Every time I paused, it stopped. Every time I moved, it resumed, deliberate, patient. Whoever or whatever was back there, it wasn't random. At last, I reached a small river. The moonlight glinted off the water, giving me some sense of relief. I had crossed it here many times before, and I knew the path on the other side would lead back to the main road. But as I stepped onto the slippery rocks, I saw another movement, a shadow flitting across the opposite bank. My heart sank. Whatever was following me wasn't just wandering the woods. It had been tracking me. I forced myself to focus. I wasn't going to let panic decide my actions. I climbed across the rocks carefully, keeping my knife in hand. When I hit the opposite side, I didn't stop. I moved into the trees, heading for a faint trail I remembered from previous trips. The forest around me was dense, branches snagging my clothes, thorns cutting my arms. I stumbled and scraped, but I didn't stop. I could hear the snap of something heavy behind me, but not immediately. It was patient, letting me get a little ahead, waiting for the right moment, and the thought made my stomach knot even tighter. After what felt like hours, but was likely only 20 minutes, I spotted the faint glow of my truck's headlights in the distance. Relief surged through me, but I didn't slow down. I burst through the last thicket of trees, branches slapping my arms and face, and made it to the gravel path leading to the road. My legs burned, my lungs were on fire, and my hands were scratched, but I didn't care. I ran the last few meters, nearly falling onto the hood of the truck, yanking the keys from my pocket. I slammed the door, locked it, and started the engine. The headlights illuminated the trees behind me. Nothing moved, no sound, just the calm, quiet forest, as if nothing had followed me at all. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, and for a moment I considered just leaving everything behind and driving straight home. But I couldn't. I had to check the last camera. I drove slowly, eyes darting to the shadows, until I reached the third camera. It was attached to a tree at the edge of a small ridge. I approached carefully, scanning the darkness. The camera was intact. I swapped the card, heart still racing. Nothing on the footage indicated danger, just the usual deer and raccoons, but I knew better. Something had been following me, something patient and deliberate, and it had been close enough to watch me move through the trees. By the time I got back to the truck, darkness had fully settled over the forest. I locked the doors, started the engine, and drove home without stopping. The forest disappeared behind me, quiet and calm as though nothing had happened. I scrubbed at the dirt and scratches on my hands in the sink when I got home, trying to shake the image of those dark, watching shadows. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I kept imagining what I'd seen, what had followed me, and the thought made my skin crawl. I don't go into that part of the forest anymore. I still check the cameras, but only during the day, and I make sure to bring someone with me. I've learned to respect the silence of the woods, the way the shadows can play tricks on your mind, but I've also learned that sometimes the things you fear aren't tricks at all. Sometimes they're real, patient, and waiting for the right moment. And sometimes all you can do is move fast, keep your senses sharp, and hope you make it out before it decides to get closer. I didn't plan on staying in the woods until dark, but the day slipped away from me faster than I expected. My plan was simple: hike out to an old fire tower I had seen on a map, take a few photos, and head back before sunset. I packed light, just water, a granola bar, a flashlight, and a small first aid kit. The trail leading in was narrow but easy, and the air felt sharp and clean. The woods were quiet in a calm, harmless way, like everything was settling down after a long week. I walked deeper into the trees, and the sun dipped lower behind the tall pines. The fire tower stood far off the main trail, on a little rise covered in uneven ground, old stumps, and thick brush. The deeper I went, the less familiar the trail became. After about an hour, I noticed how different the air felt. The breeze died down, and there was this heavy stillness that made every step sound too loud. Even the birds had stopped making noise. The forest felt closed in, like the trees had shifted closer without me noticing. I reached the fire tower when the sun was already slipping behind the hills. The structure looked abandoned, patches of rust covering the supports and weeds growing around the base. I didn't climb it. It didn't look stable, and I wasn't taking any stupid risks. I took a few pictures and turned around to head back, hoping to beat the last bit of light. Within 10 minutes of walking, I knew I had messed up. The trail looked different, more overgrown than before, the dirt uneven and scattered with fallen branches I didn't remember stepping over. I kept walking, telling myself I wasn't lost, just in a slightly different area, but that sinking feeling in my chest grew heavier with every step. The sun disappeared completely, leaving only that weak gray light that fades too fast to be useful. I grabbed my flashlight and turned it on. The beam cut through the darkness but only lit a small circle ahead. Everything outside that circle felt alive in a way I didn't like. Shifting shadows, quick movements I couldn't see clearly, soft rustles that never seemed to come from the same direction twice. I kept walking, faster now, trying to stay calm. My boots sank into soft patches of earth, and every step felt like an argument with the ground. The forest had changed into a maze of thick roots and low branches that forced me to duck and stumble constantly. The silence felt unnatural. I should have heard crickets, small animals, anything. Instead, It was just me, my breathing, and the crunch of leaves under my feet. I finally reached a small clearing, trying to get my bearings. The clearing looked like a campsite someone had used years ago. Flat ground, a circle of stones where a fire might have been, and a few old branches lying around. I didn't plan on staying there long. I just needed a moment to think. I stood still, trying to remember every turn I had taken, every split in the trail I might have missed. My flashlight flicked across the trees, and something caught my eye. Fresh footprints in the soft dirt. Not animal prints, human prints. They weren't mine. Mine were deep, angled, messy from rushing. These were different. They were straight, deliberate, evenly spaced. Someone had been walking through the clearing not long before I got there. Maybe minutes, maybe even less. My stomach twisted. I felt that slow, crawling fear that starts tiny and spreads across your whole body. I knelt and checked the prints closely. The edges were sharp, not softened by wind or time, and they didn't lead toward the fire tower. They led deeper into the woods, farther from where I needed to go. For a second, I considered following them. Maybe they belonged to someone who knew the area. But something about the prints felt wrong. They moved too directly, too cleanly, like the person who made them didn't hesitate at all. I couldn't imagine anything moving confidently in that darkness unless it had been out there for a long time. I backed out of the clearing and tried heading in the opposite direction. My flashlight beam shook more now, not because of the light, but because my hands wouldn't stop trembling. I moved slowly, trying not to make noise. The forest didn't feel empty anymore. Felt like it was paying attention. After a few minutes, I heard it. A soft, steady crunch behind me. Not a twig snapping randomly. Not a squirrel running. This had rhythm. Wait, steps. Someone was walking, keeping pace with me. I stopped moving. The steps stopped too. My throat tightened. I turned off my flashlight to listen better, standing completely still. My eyes adjusted just enough to see faint shapes, shadows of trunks and branches. I waited. The forest waited with me. My ears strained for any sound. Then I heard it again, one slow step, deliberate, like whoever was behind me wanted me to know they were there. I didn't turn around. I didn't say anything. I just started moving again. Faster this time, my breath growing uneven. My legs burned with how quickly I pushed through the brush. Branches slapped against my arms and chest, scratching my skin. I didn't care. I kept moving. I had to. The steps behind me grew quicker, closing the distance little by little. I broke into a near run even though the ground was dangerous. Roots stuck up everywhere. Fallen branches created natural traps. I stumbled multiple times, catching myself with my hands, scraping them open on the dirt and rocks. The woods blurred around me, the flashlight beam bouncing wildly. I didn't dare look behind me. The fear of what I might see was worse than the fear of not knowing. Finally, I saw something familiar. The split in the trail near a large, crooked pine tree I remembered passing on my way in. Relief hit me so hard I almost dropped the flashlight. I turned left at the tree and burst into a slightly clearer path. I recognized the slope ahead, the dip in the ground, the way the bushes formed a natural tunnel. I was close now, close to the main trail, close to my exit from this nightmare. I ran. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, and my heartbeat drowned out everything else. I didn't hear the footsteps anymore, but I didn't trust that. The woods had a way of swallowing sounds. I just kept running until the trees thinned out and the beam of my flashlight hit something metallic. My truck. I sprinted the last stretch, nearly sliding on loose dirt, yanked the door open, jumped inside, and slammed it shut so hard the whole vehicle shook. My hands shook violently as I locked every door. The forest stood silent around me, tall and dark, as if nothing had happened at all. I didn't start the truck for a full minute. I just sat there, breathing hard, staring at the trail entrance, expecting to see someone step out. Nothing did. No movement, no sound. Just the quiet, heavy woods watching me like they had since the sun went down. When I finally drove away, I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see someone on the road behind me. But there was no one. Not a single car, not a single person. Just me and the dark road winding through miles of trees. When I got home, I washed the dirt and blood from my hands and looked at myself in the mirror. I didn't look injured. I looked shaken, like someone who had been prey without realizing it until too late. I still don't know who was out there with me. I don't know why their footprints led deeper into the forest or why their steps matched mine so perfectly. But I know exactly what I felt. And I know I'll never go back there alone again. The woods don't need ghosts or monsters to be dangerous. Sometimes the scariest thing out there is just another person who knows the forest better than you do, and has no reason to let you leave. I went into the woods that Sunday because I needed a break from everything. My head felt heavy all week, and I thought a long walk alone would help me reset. There was a trail about an hour from where I lived, a quiet one that didn't get many visitors unless it was a long weekend. It stretched deep through old pine forest, with long straight paths and a few sharp turns where the ground dipped down into pockets of wet soil and broken branches. I had walked parts of it before, but never the full loop. That morning, I told myself I would do the entire thing. I parked my car on the dirt patch near the entrance. The air felt colder than I expected, even though the sun was out. The trees were tall enough to block most of the light, so even early in the day the trail looked dim. I started walking, letting the quiet sink in. All I could hear was wind brushing the tops of the trees and the steady crunch of dry leaves under my boots. For the first hour, everything felt peaceful. I kept a slow pace and enjoyed the feeling of being away from people and noise. But after a while, something small started to feel off. I didn't notice it right away. It was more like a slow change in the background, something I only understood later when I looked back at it. The woods felt too quiet. Not peaceful quiet, more like the kind where the air is holding its breath. I walked another few minutes before realizing I hadn't heard a single bird call for at least half an hour. Usually these woods had plenty of birds, especially in the morning. I stopped for a second, listening. The wind was gone too. Everything felt still, like the forest had paused. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe the birds moved deeper into the trees or the wind died down. I kept walking, but the trail seemed different now. The trees looked closer together, like they were leaning in. I tried not to stare at them, but my eyes kept drifting that way. I feel stupid saying that because they were only trees, but the tightness of the path made me walk faster. I didn't like the feeling of something closing in around me. About 2 hours in, the trail reached a long bend that curved around a low slope. I remembered this part from the map. The loop narrowed here before branching off into a straight stretch that would eventually lead back toward the parking area. I stepped around the bend, and that's when I saw something lying across the trail about 50 feet ahead. At first, I thought it was just a fallen branch, but when I got closer, I saw it was a backpack. It was old, dirty, and partly unzipped. The fabric looked sun-faded, like it had been sitting out there a long time. I didn't touch it. I didn't even get that close. I stood a few feet away, just staring. Something about it bothered me. It didn't look weather-damaged enough to be abandoned for months or years, but it also didn't look fresh. It was like it had been placed there, but not recently. I took one slow step backward. A weird tight feeling crawled up my spine. I didn't want to look inside the bag, and I didn't want to stay near it. There was no sign of anyone around. The trail behind and in front of me was empty, straight and narrow. I decided to walk around it, moving into the trees so I didn't have to step over it. But as soon as I got 10 feet past it, I felt the strongest urge to check behind me. Couldn't ignore it. I turned my head and looked down the trail. The backpack was still there, untouched. But now the woods behind it looked darker, like the trees had grown denser in that short moment. I stared for a few seconds, then forced myself to keep walking. My body felt tense now. My heartbeat was faster than it should have been for a calm walk. I went on for another 15 minutes, and that's when I noticed footprints. They were faint and spaced far apart, like someone had been walking quickly. They weren't mine. The pattern was wrong. The prints were deeper on the toes, which meant the person had been leaning forward while walking or running. The ground was soft enough to show details, and I could see the heel marks were barely there. Whoever made them wasn't strolling. He was moving like he was trying to get away from something. The prints went straight down the same trail I was following. I tried to convince myself they were old, maybe from a hiker earlier that morning, but the edges were sharp. No wind, no rain, nothing had softened them. They looked fresh. I kept following the path, but now every step felt heavy. The woods seemed even quieter than before. I reached a spot where the prints suddenly stopped. Just stopped. They didn't fade or drift into the grass. They ended in the middle of the trail like the person had vanished mid-stride. I stood there staring at the last footprint for a long time. My throat felt dry. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the trees. Every shadow looked wrong. Every patch of dark ground looked like it could hide something or someone. I had never felt so aware of my own breathing. I decided right then that I wasn't finishing the loop. I needed to turn back. I started walking the way I came, keeping my pace steady. I didn't want to run because running felt like something that would trigger whatever my brain was warning me about. I kept my shoulders tight, waiting for the slightest crack of a branch or rustle of leaves. But the woods stayed completely silent. When I reached the spot where the backpack had been, my stomach dropped. It was gone. The trail was empty, not a trace of it anywhere. The ground didn't even show a mark where it used to be. I didn't want to believe it. I scanned the sides of the trail, the bushes, the slope leading into deeper woods. Nothing. It was simply gone. Now I knew for sure that I had to get out. I didn't care how far the parking lot was. I just kept moving as fast as I could without breaking into a full run. My hands were shaking. My skin felt cold. I kept listening, expecting footsteps behind me, expecting movement between the trees, but the silence stayed thick. About 20 minutes later, I noticed something else. The trees on both sides of the trail looked scraped. Not deep claw marks or anything dramatic, just long, thin scratches on the bark, like something had been dragged along the trunks. They weren't there earlier. I would have noticed. They appeared in sets, 3 or 4 lines running from shoulder height down to the base of the trees. I avoided looking at them for too long. My mind started filling in the blanks with things I didn't want to imagine. I just kept walking faster, almost jogging now. My legs burned, but I didn't stop. Another 10 minutes passed before I finally heard a sound. Not footsteps, not breathing, just a heavy thud somewhere deeper in the trees to my right. A single thud, like something solid hitting the ground. I froze for a second, then forced myself to move again. I didn't look in that direction. I didn't want to see anything. When I finally saw the small wooden post that marked the start of the trail, I felt a wave of relief so strong my knees almost buckled. I walked the last stretch faster than I ever had before. The parking lot came into view between the trees, and I saw my car sitting alone in the corner of the dirt patch. But there was something else. There were footprints around my car. The same kind I had seen on the trail. Deep on the toes, barely any heel. They circled the car twice, then trailed off into the trees behind it. I didn't waste a second. I unlocked the door, got inside, and shut it hard. I didn't even put my seatbelt on right away. I just locked the doors and sat there for a moment trying to breathe. My entire body felt stiff. Finally, I started the engine, turned the car around, and drove out of that place as fast as the road allowed. I didn't look into the rearview mirror. I didn't want to see anything standing at the tree line. When I got home, I checked every door, every window, every corner of the house. I didn't sleep that night, or the night after. Even now, when I think back to it, the thing that scares me the most isn't the missing backpack or the sudden ending footprints or the scratches on the trees. It's the fact that whoever was out there knew which car was mine, and they watched me long enough to walk around it, twice, before disappearing into the woods again. I haven't gone hiking alone since that day. I don't think I ever will again. I had planned a solo trip into the forest to scout for a small deer hunting area I'd been thinking about for months. It was late afternoon when I left my truck at the edge of a gravel path that led deep into the woods. The sun was already low, slanting through the trees in long golden streaks that lit the forest floor with uneven patches of light. I strapped on my backpack, double-checked that I had my flashlight, a knife, water, and some trail snacks, and started walking down the narrow trail. The air was cool, damp, and smelled faintly of wet leaves and pine needles, a mix that always made me feel both calm and alert. At first, the walk was peaceful. I moved slowly, scanning the forest floor for tracks, loose twigs that might show recent animal activity, and listening for the faint rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. Birds were singing sporadically, and I caught the flash of a squirrel darting up a tree. I made a mental note of a few places where deer might feed and kept walking. The forest was dense, and sunlight only broke through in spots, making it hard to judge depth. The path twisted and curved naturally with the terrain, and I was careful with every step because roots and rocks jutted out at awkward angles. After about an hour, the sun dipped lower, and shadows started to lengthen. The forest was quieter than it had been. I noticed the birds had gone silent. Even the wind seemed to die down, leaving the woods almost unnervingly still. That's when I realized I had walked farther than I intended. I paused to check my compass and realized the path I was on was unfamiliar. I knew I could backtrack, but something about the silence made me uneasy. My chest tightened. The forest had shifted from peaceful to oppressive, and I suddenly felt like I was being watched. I told myself it was probably just nerves, just the kind of tension that comes when the light fades and shadows stretch unnaturally across the trees. I started walking again, this time a little faster. Every few steps, I caught the movement of something out of the corner of my eye. A branch swaying, a darker patch among the trees. But every time I turned my head, nothing was there. The shadows seemed to move differently than the trees themselves, and the feeling of being followed grew stronger. My pulse quickened, and I tried to stay calm, telling myself that my mind was just reacting to being alone and out of familiar territory. As the forest grew darker, the underbrush became thicker. Fallen branches, piles of leaves, and small saplings slowed me down. My flashlight was necessary now, but it only lit a small circle of the path ahead, leaving everything else in darkness. The sounds of my own footsteps, the snap of twigs, the crunch of leaves under my boots were deafening in the silence. And then I heard it, a single, deliberate snap of a branch somewhere behind me. My stomach sank, and I froze. The snap was followed by another, closer this time, and then a faint, almost imperceptible rustling. My breath caught in my throat. Whoever or whatever was back there was not moving randomly. It was waiting, tracking me. I forced myself to keep moving, slow and deliberate, trying to stay quiet while not giving myself away. Every few seconds, I glanced over my shoulder. The flashlight illuminated patches of tree trunks and underbrush, but nothing emerged from the darkness. Still, the feeling of eyes on me didn't go away. I could feel it pressing in, like the forest itself had decided to focus on me. The wind, which had been absent, now stirred occasionally, brushing leaves against my face and making the shadows jump. Every little sound seemed amplified, each one making my heart race faster. Eventually, the trail curved down toward a small creek I recognized from a previous visit. The sound of running water was comforting, though the bank was slippery and covered in wet leaves. I crossed carefully, stepping on rocks slick with moss, and the moment my boots touched the other side, I froze. Something large moved among the trees across the creek, a dark silhouette that vanished almost instantly. My first thought was bear, but the shape was human-sized, and the way it moved was deliberate, not erratic like an animal. I forced myself to move forward, keeping my flashlight steady. My hands shook, my adrenaline spiking with every step. The forest thickened again, and the darkness made it hard to keep my bearings. I stumbled over hidden roots and rocks, scraping my hands and knees, but I didn't stop. I had to get out. Every now and then, I heard that same deliberate snap behind me, close enough that it could have been just a step away. I didn't look back. I couldn't risk knowing how close it really was. My mind raced with possibilities, hunters, trespassers, something else entirely. But there was no time to speculate. All I could do was keep moving. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I spotted the faint glow of my truck's headlights through the trees. Relief surged through me, but I forced myself not to slow down. I stumbled through the last thicket, branches scraping my arms and legs, and burst onto the gravel road. My boots slid on loose stones, and I almost fell face first onto the hood of the truck. Heart hammering, I fumbled with the keys, locked the doors, and sat inside, chest heaving, trying to calm down. The forest behind me was still silent, as if nothing had followed me at all. My mind tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a hunter, maybe it was a deer or some other animal, but the precision and timing of the noises had been deliberate. I knew what I had experienced wasn't random. I stayed in the truck for a long time, shaking, scanning the edges of the forest with my flashlight. Nothing moved. Every sound that wasn't mine seemed exaggerated, every shadow menacing, but there was nothing out there anymore. The realization that I had been truly alone with someone, or something, watching me, tracking me through the woods, stayed with me long after I started the engine. I drove home slowly, constantly glancing at the tree line, my hands still shaking on the steering wheel. Once home, I washed the dirt and scratches from my hands in the sink, replaying the night in my head. The forest, normally a place of peace, had become a labyrinth of shadows and quiet threats. I realized then that some parts of nature are not meant to be underestimated. The quiet, the darkness, the sense of being watched, all of it had been real. And sometimes, survival isn't about courage or strength. It's about moving fast, staying alert, and not giving the thing following you the chance to get any closer. I haven't gone back to that part of the forest since. I still hike, but only during daylight and always with a companion. I respect the woods more now, not just as a place of beauty, but as a place where patience, observation, and caution are essential. And I know that out there, in the shadows, something is waiting. Not for me to see it, not for me to hear it, but patient, watching, and deliberate enough that if I ever make the same mistake, it won't just be a story. I'd be its next mistake. I had been planning a solo hike for weeks, a small expedition into a stretch of forest I'd only driven past before. The weather was cool but dry, perfect for long walking, and the forecast promised clear skies. I left my truck at the edge of a narrow dirt road that wound into the woods and adjusted my backpack, making sure I had water, a flashlight, a small knife, and a light snack. I told myself it would be a short hike, a few hours at most, but something in the quiet of the forest always slowed me down, made time stretch and warp. The first part of the trail was simple. It was well-trodden, and the sunlight filtered through the trees in long golden streaks. Birds were singing, and the smell of pine mixed with the damp earth was intoxicating in a calming way. I moved slowly, looking at the tracks in the dirt, broken twigs, and the small furrows in the underbrush that told me what had passed through recently. Deer, squirrels, maybe a fox. Everything seemed normal. I felt a small thrill of satisfaction. It was just me and the forest, no one else around, no noise other than the natural sounds of wildlife. After about an hour, the trail narrowed and became less defined. The sunlight dimmed as the trees grew closer together, their thick branches interlocking above me. The forest floor was littered with twigs, leaves, and small rocks that made footing uncertain. I slowed down, careful not to twist an ankle, and noticed how quiet it had become. The birds had stopped singing, the breeze seemed to fade, and even the small rustles of animals in the underbrush were gone. I paused and listened, the silence pressing down in a way that made my chest tighten. Something about it felt different, heavier, like the woods themselves had paused to watch. I kept moving, but my pace was faster now, deliberate. Every few steps, I glanced over my shoulder. Shadows moved strangely between the trees, not in the way that shadows should move with the sun or the wind. A patch of darkness seemed too solid, too deliberate, and I shook my head to try to dismiss it. I told myself it was just my imagination, that the low light and fatigue were playing tricks. But the sensation of being watched lingered, persistent, gnawing at the back of my neck. The trail curved sharply down toward a small stream. The water was clear and cold, trickling over smooth stones. I crouched to take a sip and let the coolness soothe my tense hands. That's when I heard it, a faint snap behind me, like a branch breaking under weight. I froze, my heart lurching. Another snap followed, closer this time, and then the faint rustle of leaves. My stomach turned. Whatever was behind me was moving with purpose. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. I forced myself not to panic. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see it yet. I pushed forward, moving carefully over the rocks and slippery roots near the stream. My boots slipped on wet stones, and I had to use my hands to steady myself. Another snap echoed behind me, closer again. My mind raced with possibilities. A hunter, a lost hiker, maybe a wild animal. But the sound was different from anything I had ever encountered. It was calculated, measured, not the chaotic movement of a deer or the erratic steps of a raccoon. This felt patient. The forest grew denser as I moved uphill from the stream. Every step was a struggle over twisted roots and loose soil. My flashlight illuminated only a small circle, leaving the edges of the woods in darkness. I could hear my own breathing, ragged, and the thump of my heart. Every now and then, I thought I saw movement at the edge of the light, something darker, shifting, but when I focused on it, it vanished. It was always just beyond the reach of the beam, always following, always there. I reached a ridge that overlooked a small clearing, and I paused to catch my breath. Moonlight had started to filter through the thinning canopy above, casting long, ghostly shadows across the forest floor. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Footprints. They weren't animal tracks. They were human-sized, clear in the soft earth, and they were moving in my direction. My pulse quickened. Whoever or whatever was out here had been following me, and now they were close enough that I could see their path clearly. Panic set in, but I forced myself to stay calm. Running blindly through the forest would be dangerous. Instead, I retraced my steps slightly to reach a narrow, overgrown trail I remembered from a previous trip. It led back to a gravel road that connected to the main path. I kept my flashlight ready and my knife in hand, moving quickly but cautiously. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig behind me made my chest tighten. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. The trail twisted and turned, and the forest seemed to close in around me. Branches scraped my arms and face, and the uneven ground made every step a potential hazard. I stumbled several times, cutting my hands and knees on sharp roots, but I didn't stop. The sound of movement behind me was constant now, deliberate and rhythmic. My mind was a whirlwind of fear and focus. I kept telling myself to stay calm, to put one foot in front of the other to survive. After what felt like an eternity, I spotted the faint glow of the gravel road through the trees. Relief surged through me, but I didn't slow down. I pushed through the last thicket of branches, scraping myself against the underbrush, and burst onto the gravel path. My boots skidded on loose stones, and I nearly fell, but I kept moving toward my truck. The headlights reflected off the surrounding trees, but there was no movement, no sound. It was as if the forest had swallowed whatever had been following me. I reached the truck, chest heaving, hands shaking. I fumbled with the keys, unlocked the doors, and dove inside. The vehicle felt like a small island of safety. I sat there for a long moment, trying to calm my breathing, my flashlight illuminating the dense tree line in front of me. Nothing moved. No shadows. No rustling. Just the calm, quiet forest. I told myself it had been a hunter or a lost hiker. Maybe an animal had made some of the noises. But deep down, I knew the precision of the footsteps, the timing of the snaps. It had been deliberate. It had been following me. I started the engine and drove slowly down the dirt road, constantly scanning the edges of the forest. My arms and legs were scratched, my hands still trembling. I could feel my adrenaline slowly fading, replaced by a dull ache in my chest and muscles. The forest behind me seemed peaceful again, deceptively calm, as if nothing had ever been there. I thought about turning back, about going in with another person, but I knew some part of me had already learned the lesson. Respect the forest, respect its silence, and never underestimate what might be watching. By the time I reached the main road, night had fully fallen. The sky was clear, stars scattered across the blackness like tiny specks of light. I stopped at a gas station, bought water and something to eat, and tried to shake off the tension. But every time I closed my eyes, I could see the shadows between the trees, feel the weight of eyes on me. I knew I had been lucky, very lucky. The forest is beautiful, quiet, and peaceful, but it can be patient, and it can wait. And sometimes you're not just walking through the trees. Sometimes the trees themselves are part of the game, and the game is watching you. I haven't gone back to that section of the forest since. I still hike, but only during the day and always with someone else. I carry extra supplies, stay alert, and respect the woods in a way I never did before. I know now that fear in the forest is not imagination. It's real, and sometimes it's there for a reason. And if you ignore it, if you wander alone and let your guard down, you might not be as lucky next time. The forest doesn't forgive mistakes, and it doesn't need to. It just waits. I never thought a simple solo hike could turn into one of the scariest experiences of my life. I had been hiking for years, and I knew the woods around my town well, or at least I thought I did. That morning, I packed my usual gear. A small backpack with water, some trail snacks, a first aid kit, my headlamp, and a compass, even though I was sure I wouldn't need it. I left my phone on airplane mode, partly because the signal was bad in that area and partly because I wanted to disconnect. The sun was warm but low in the sky as I started down the trail, a narrow dirt path that wound through towering pine trees. The smell of damp earth mixed with pine sap filled the air, and at first, everything felt peaceful. For the first couple of hours, the hike was normal. Birds chirped faintly, and a light breeze rustled the leaves. I passed a small stream, where the water ran clear and cold, and I paused to refill my bottle. I noticed some deer tracks near the bank, fresh and crisp, and a small family of rabbits darted into the underbrush. It felt like the kind of day you read about in nature blogs. Calm, serene, and quiet in a comforting way. I had decided to take a less traveled loop that cut deeper into the woods. The trail became narrower, almost overgrown in places, and I had to push branches aside to keep moving. The sounds of birds began to fade, replaced by the occasional creak of trees swaying and the distant snap of a twig under some unseen animal's weight. I told myself it was nothing, just deer, maybe a fox. But there was an edge to the silence that felt unnatural. The deeper I went, the heavier the air became, almost like the forest itself was pressing in around me. Around mid-afternoon, I reached a section where the trail split into two. Both paths looked equally overgrown, but one seemed slightly more worn, so I took it. That decision would haunt me later. The path immediately grew steeper, and the forest thickened. Moss covered the trees, and shadows pooled in every crevice. I noticed that the forest floor had an unusual amount of fallen branches, some as thick as my arm, which made every step noisy and awkward. I had to move slowly, careful not to trip. Every few minutes, I thought I heard something moving just off the trail. A rustle here, a crack there, but every time I looked, nothing was there. After about an hour, I came to a clearing. It wasn't large, maybe the size of a small field, but it was completely empty except for the tall grass swaying in the light breeze. I sat down on a fallen log to rest and eat a snack. As I sat, I noticed something odd. The tracks in the dirt around the clearing weren't animal tracks. They were boot prints, fresh and deep, and they circled the clearing in no clear direction. My heart started to pound. Whoever had been here was either still around or had just left. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was probably another hiker, someone like me exploring the woods, but the prints didn't look random. They looked deliberate, like someone had been pacing, waiting. I packed up quickly, trying to ignore the unease crawling up my spine, and continued down the trail. That's when I noticed the first real sign of trouble. There were markers on the trees, carved roughly, almost like tally marks. 1, 2, 3, 4. More boot prints appeared, this time heading in the same direction as me. I felt my pulse quicken. The woods were thick here, and there was no one else in sight, yet I had the distinct feeling I wasn't alone. As I walked faster, I tried to remember the trail from memory, but this section of the woods wasn't familiar. The trees looked similar, but nothing matched my usual landmarks. Sunlight was fading, and shadows stretched long and dark across the trail. The rustling in the underbrush grew more frequent, sharper. At first, I thought it was deer, but the sounds were too deliberate, too heavy, like someone or something was moving through the trees with purpose. I came to a point where the trail dipped into a small ravine with a narrow, rocky stream at the bottom. Crossing it was tricky because the stones were slippery, but I managed to get to the other side. As soon as I did, I realized that the sound of footsteps behind me had stopped. Complete silence. My ears strained for anything. The creak of a branch, the whisper of a leaf, but nothing. It was almost worse than the noise. I started to walk again, slowly, scanning the forest in every direction. Then I heard it. A snapping of a branch closer this time. Not from behind me, off to the right. Something large was moving through the brush, breaking branches as it went. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I didn't know which direction was safe. I took a deep breath and ran along the trail, trying not to slip on the wet leaves. My backpack bounced against my back, every sound amplified in the still forest. I didn't stop to look back. I ran until my legs burned, my lungs heaving, until I reached another small clearing with a fallen tree I could climb. I threw myself over it and crouched, barely daring to breathe. The forest was quiet again, but this time it felt wrong, unnatural. My rational mind told me it was probably another hiker, someone out for a late afternoon trek, but a part of me didn't believe it. Something about the deliberate pacing, the markers, the prints, it all felt calculated. I stayed crouched until the sun dipped below the trees, leaving only the dim glow of twilight. Panic started to set in. I realized I had no clear path back. My compass was in my pocket, but I didn't want to take the time to orient myself in case whoever or whatever was out there was still nearby. My best chance was to move slowly, quietly, and try to retrace my steps. By the time it was almost dark, I finally recognized a familiar tree, a giant pine with a split trunk that marked the halfway point on my usual loop. Relief surged through me, but it was tempered by exhaustion. I moved as quickly as I could without making noise, following the faint path back toward the parking lot. The last stretch of trail was the most unnerving. Darkness had fully descended, and my headlamp cut a narrow cone of light through the trees. Every shadow seemed alive, every sound magnified. A sudden rustle in the leaves made me jump, but it was only a raccoon, I realized with shaking hands. Finally, I saw the faint glow of headlights through the trees. The trail opened up to the edge of the road near the parking area. My legs were numb, my back ached, and my hands trembled, but I ran the last few meters and collapsed into my car. I locked the doors immediately and took deep, shuddering breaths. I sat there for a long time, staring out into the black forest, unwilling to move. The drive home felt surreal. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, expecting to see someone following me. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I was exhausted but relieved. I kept replaying the day in my mind. The strange prints, the tally marks, the deliberate rustling. It had been terrifying, but I told myself I had been lucky. Lucky to know the woods well enough to find my way. Lucky that nothing worse had happened. That night, I unpacked my gear carefully and checked my trail map. I marked the path I had taken, the points where I had seen the prints and marks. I realized I had stumbled into a part of the forest I didn't usually visit, a part that seemed to attract someone, or something that didn't want to be found. I resolved never to take that loop alone again. In the days that followed, I told myself the fear would fade, but it didn't completely. Every time I went back to the woods, I stayed on well-trodden trails, avoided unfamiliar paths, and kept my phone on. The experience left me cautious in a way I hadn't expected. It reminded me that even familiar places can hide dangers, and sometimes the most frightening moments in the woods aren't supernatural. They're simply the knowledge that someone else has been there, watching, pacing, waiting. I never found out who or what had left those prints, and I don't know if I want to. Some mysteries, I decided, are better left alone. All I know is that the forest had shown me its quiet, patient side, and it had reminded me that solitude can be dangerous when someone else is out there, moving silently just beyond the trees.